Hello, I'm Eric Devereaux, and welcome back to this series of videos that offer a preview of my textbook, Methods of Policy Analysis, which is available to you for free online. And I've put a description down below so that you can have the link to access the textbook. Today, I'm going to be continuing this, discussing the section of the book where we build different types of models of the policy process using sequences, timelines, or other similar representations of how processes flow and influence our public policy choices and help us to explain how we're getting outcomes that we might see as less desirable and maybe even indicate how we might move to outcomes that are more desirable in the eyes of our client and in the perspective of our organization. So last time we looked at a series of very simple models that are just simply sequences of events as they occur, represented in a couple different ways, a single path, branching paths, thinking about situations where, for example, clients are going through some type of a program and some complete the program and some do not and exit. And what is that process? What is those percentages of who gets through versus who exits? Maybe tell us about points to intervene to try to increase the success rates. Today, we're going to move on to the next class of sequences, one that has an additional element to it. And that element is when there are things going on in the world that we as decision makers or policy makers cannot control. We have to prepare for eventualities, which we have to think of as being probabilistic events. So let me just begin first off just by sharing with you the chapter, first page we're going to be looking at today, which is chapter 6 of the book, Games Against Nature. So a game against nature is a phrase that comes out of economics and game theory, in which the decision makers are basically making choices as if they were playing a game, like you're playing chess or some other type of game where you make a move, and then nature, you can influence but cannot really control, then makes a move that you can try to expect based on some type of probability distribution of what's going on, but you cannot control it, and you have to be prepared for a variety of outcomes that you cannot control. So these are all fit under the notion of games against nature, and then we have to figure out in advance, expecting different potential outcomes to occur, what we might do to try to shape a result that we would prefer to have. So let me switch now to the device that I use to draw for you in real time. And I'm now going to diagram what this looks like in practice. So when you're diagramming this, I'm going to be using the tools that are known as quick decision analysis. And if in the book, there are links to some classic texts in quick decision analysis. The most famous one is by Bain and Vopel, called Quick Decision Analysis for Busy Decision Makers. It is unfortunately out of print. I wish it was not out of print. It's a classic. And the material is really excellent. And I regret that you can purchase it as I did from an aftermarket reseller who's selling used copies. But it's a terrific book, and I wish was more in use. I also note that many of the textbooks in this field don't pick up on this material as much as they should, and I think that's a mistake. My textbook does pick up on it and try to show you how to use it. So let me switch over here and diagram some things for you. So when you have a situation where you have what we call a game against nature, or some type essentially of a gamble, you start out with a decision that you control, and that's represented by this square box. And let me give you an example that I think resonates with students in the types of programs I teach in, which are programs offered in schools of public affairs, schools of public service, schools of public administration. Sometimes we have masters of public administration, masters of public policy degrees. We have other degrees that we offer as well. But you are trying to figure out which degree you might want to earn, and you're doing that in reference to things that actually are outside your control, which we'll go through in a minute. So one of your options, of course, is to get no degree at all, just to stick with your undergraduate degree and go right into the labor market. Okay, so this is the no degree option. And you basically bypass getting a master's degree for now, and you go into the labor market. And see, that is where you come up against the real game against nature. The circle represents something you cannot control, which is what the labor market does with you when you enter the labor market and seek to have a job and a career track you would like to have, and you're doing it with no master's degree. Okay. So we're going to say no MPA or MPP degree in the case of our field. Okay. Or perhaps you make the decision and you decide that you'll get an MPA, a Master's of Public Administration degree. And that degree comes with a particular focus of its content, its core courses, its electives, the choices that you can make in terms of concentration areas. And or perhaps just to keep things simple, you decide instead that you'll go get the MPP degree, which again has a different set of core, may have a different set of core requirements or electives or concentrations. The MPA is often a degree that is built around management content. Very common to find individuals getting this degree who are thinking of careers managing nonprofits or going into government agencies and being managers in government agencies. MPP often is a degree that is tied to policy analysis and may have more quantitative content, may have more connection to economics and other analytical techniques. And the individuals that go into this degree are thinking about having a career related to policy analysis. They might go to work for in a legislature. They might go to work in an executive branch agency, but doing policy analysis. They could go to work for nonprofits. They could work as consultants. But it's a sort of thought of as a slightly different skill set and a different focus. But again, everybody faces the job market. Okay. So when you face the job market, you're looking at a branching path. One branch, basically, we will say success. Okay. You get, you get the desired career. So we'll call this the desired career. And then alternatively, unfortunately, you don't get the desired career. Okay. You get the desired career with probability P1, a probability that is somewhat out of your control. And the less desired career, by definition, because there has to be 100% outcome here, is 1 minus P1. So if the probability of getting your desired career is 0.75 or 75%, 3/4 of the time, then the alternate path would be 25% of the time you do not get your desired career. I actually don't know what the real numbers are here. Please don't take those numbers to heart because I don't have any actual data in this particular case to fuel that. And then you get outcomes, right? And one of the things to note is that in both of these tracks, okay, the problem is that you had to pay tuition and take time out of your life to earn the degree. And that goes into your calculus about whether or not you should go down this road or that. Because in many ways, the costs are the same to you going down this road, but the benefits are strikingly different. Similarly, up here, you have the same thing. You might actually end up with your desired career. We'll call this P2, okay? Or you might end up not having your desired career. We'll call this 1 minus P2. And uh, uh, but in this path, as opposed to this one, you don't take the time out of your life and you don't pay tuition to get the degree. So that's a factor. And also, you might assess these probabilities different. Basically, you might say the probability of my earning my desired career, achieving my desired career without the MPA and MPP is less than my probability of doing it with an MPA or an MPP. And similarly, you might have a similar calculus down here for getting the MPP if that's something you're thinking about doing. And we have a P3 and a 1 minus P3. And again, the lower level is our less than desired career. These are the same in terms of cost because the degree probably has the same general structure and cost to earn it, but it gives you different probabilities about achieving your desired career if there's real differences in content and focus of the programs. One of the things that I've been teaching at the University of Illinois, Chicago, Department of Public Policy Management Analytics for a couple of years, we offer 3 full-time master's degrees. One of the features of those degrees is we've tried to structure the core so that students can move from one to the other with minimal amount of effort. If they decide that in midstream that they would rather have a different degree, we try to facilitate them to do that, to try to, maximize the probability of getting their desired career and minimize their regrets about the losses associated with the tuition and the time of their lives. Okay, so this is a view of the world, but again, these circles represent the same thing. They represent the job market, which you can't control. You can certainly influence with your choices, but you cannot control it. And you have to try to anticipate whether it will or will not provide to you the career track you were looking for upon taking whichever one of these choices you take as a path. Okay. Now, you could certainly put dollar values down here and do all sorts of calculations involving money and multiplying probabilities and calculating the expected value. The expected value, an expected value is nothing more than a probability multiplied by the money that you see associated with one of these paths. So you could actually try to put money on these things, and you could try to quantify these probabilities, and then you could look for which one gave you the highest expected value. Okay. And this is actually one of the reasons why we find students really on the fence about whether to go to school, because when they sort of do these implicit calculations, they are convinced in some cases that the cost of the tuition and time necessarily to earn the degree may not yield the career options they were looking for. If you're thinking about an MPA, MPP, maybe you have to switch to a completely different set of career tracks and training tracks that you may be familiar with, business school, law school, or some other additional training or education you wanted to get. One of the things that you can do with quick decision analysis, though, is that you can rank order these outcomes, even if you don't want to overly quantify them, right? So certainly it's not difficult to say that in many ways, the number one outcome would be to not earn a master's degree and get your desired career track, especially if that held over the longer term. I'm not going to beat around the bushes. Everybody would love to avoid time and tuition money and everything else necessary. But in many cases, you may be convinced that there's real risks there. So while number one strikes you as the best path, if you could achieve it, you have doubts about getting there, right? And certainly there's 6 outcomes here. This is probably number 6, and this is another reason why it's very risky to not get the degree, because number 6 is your worst outcome in the sense that while you didn't earn the degree, you couldn't get your degree track, and then you're thinking you couldn't get your career track, sorry. And then you're thinking that without a degree and you forewent getting the degree, now what do? You're kind of locked in a little bit, perhaps, depending on where you are in life, whether you can go back and earn that master's later in life. You could find yourself sort of locked into a situation that you could have gotten out if you had, when earlier in life, earned a master's degree. Now, let's say that you very much want to have a career that's in public administration, then this is probably your number 2 option that you hope would come out. Okay, and we could similarly rank order down the line. Possibly, this is your number 3 that you instead you had to get the MPP, but it still got you in the career you wanted. And then it's sort of a toss up. These are both your fourth or fifth worst options, because you don't get the degree you want, you don't get the career you wanted, but you did take the time to get the degree. Maybe you got the wrong degree. You could flip some of these around depending on your own personal preferences. But if you're very, very risk adverse, then you're going to go for number 2 or number 3, because you really want to avoid option number 6, your worst case scenario, right? And this could be quantified. You could put tuition numbers in here, probabilities. You could think about your future career earnings and your future career opportunities and where these degrees would take you. And then you could work out a complete decision analysis. Okay. Something else that the book talks about, in certain cases, you have a game against nature if you choose some paths, but in other paths, you have a guaranteed outcome. Okay. So the book goes through the example of the decision of whether or not a country should go to war. Let's take the situation in Ukraine and the fight between Ukraine and Russia. So Ukraine faced an absolutely classic decision regarding what to do. One option The guaranteed option would be just to concede to Russia the territory that it tried to take in eastern Ukraine from the very get-go, avoid all military conflict, and just say, we'll just take the guaranteed outcome of avoiding all military conflict. We know what that outcome generally looks like. It may have some features we can't predict, but it does avoid a lot of losses on our side, a lot of expenses, a lot of battlefield casualties and deaths, even though we have to give up a giant chunk of our country to this other country. Or we could gamble, and the gamble is we go to war. And if we basically prevail in the conflict, then that may be one of our best outcomes, but we also could lose. And as my book points out, some of the conflicts we've seen in world history that look like that, countries have misperceived the probabilities associated with winning and losing. I think certainly most analysts agree that Russia, in its decision to invade Ukraine, did not accurately estimate what was going to happen next, and has now been struggling to find a path forward, having misunderestimated the chances that Ukraine might actually prevail on the battlefield over time, or that Russia could not achieve its military goals quickly and relatively painlessly. And this is sort of a classic situation that arises. Quick decision analysis is useful for governments or nonprofit organizations in any situation where they are making choices, but then they have to rely on nature to make choices for those organizations. So this happens, for example, when governments try to advocate that people avoid situations that could result in danger. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the choices available to the federal government and to the state and local governments was just to try to advocate to the public to wear masks, to avoid contact with others, to report disease, to just use a variety of public messages to try to shape public behavior. But it's a game against nature. To what degree will the public respond to those relatively low cost and low invasive measures for trying to reduce the spread of a pandemic, as opposed to harsher, more invasive measures that could include, shutting down all sorts of facilities and locking people out and shutting down roadways and stopping people and other things, and fining people, for example, all sorts of other tools available to try to shape public behavior. And this all has to be put into something of a benefit cost calculation about what happens if you go down one path or another. What is the public going to do? What type of public response are you going to get? If you set up vaccination centers, will people come and actually get vaccinated? Under how many people will get vaccinated? Will it be enough to justify the cost of those centers? How will you try to push the vaccination rates high enough to achieve a level of immunity or protection to shut the pandemic down? These are all questions that governments had to grapple with because they could not predict the public response perfectly to each given measure. They had to model it as a probability. You can also vary the probabilities and create range estimates for the expected value. So the expected value is between a bunch of different ranges, and try to figure out what's the middle of that range, what is the extent of that range, what seems to be a believable number for that range, as you try to ponder different options for dealing with a situation where you cannot control the next step. You take a step, but then the world takes a step you can influence but cannot control. You model it with probabilities, you model it with values, you can get range estimates, but at the heart of it is something that you cannot control. You can only try to predict in some manner based on evidence you've gathered, or just simply letting the probabilities range around and see what you think about the results. Thank you so much for your attention to this video. There will be future videos in this series as we work through a few more remaining process models, and then eventually we will transition into chapters of the book that deal with how to build policy alternatives around process models. Again, I thank you for your attention to the video. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you read the book and get something out of it as well. And I look forward to producing more of these videos. Bye now.